for him. And so this is the age, and she was dying. And as Jesus went, the people pressed around him. So we know from the Gospel of Matthew, because this story handled that much. But interestingly, Christian leader Dallas Willard, when he was asked if there was one word in which he would describe Jesus, what would it be? I wouldn't think of it that way. Jesus was able to encounter all we're told. One commentator says that basically that means he's the official who was responsible for the arrangements at the Jewish services there in Capernaum. And he would select, for example, those who would lead in prayer publicly before Jesus, imploring him. Implore is a word that essentially means to beg, begging him to come to his home. Listen, male Jewish leaders in the first century don't do stuff like this. They carry themselves very soberly. They have long robes. They don't run. They don't expose their legs. This is what he should have been doing from the moment that Jesus came anywhere close to his area. But it takes an emergency, doesn't it? It takes an emergency to put him on his face before Jesus. And the emergency is that his only daughter at age 12 is on her death. Has probably put all of us as parents in those shoes at some point, thinking about the worst case scenarios. It's also forced families to face a seeming number of endless interruptions. Things like this. More time with our household, sometimes only time with our household. A narrowed social life in a culture where we highly value a broad social life. It's caused us to face very few church programs like no Antioch Kids for months. But often it takes an interruption, doesn't it? And so the beautiful thing that we'll find over and over in this story today is that Jesus is willing to drop everything and come when that interruption happens, if we will implore him. He drops everything and he goes straight to Jairus' house. And when we seek Jesus, he is delighted to respond to us. It's not burdensome to him. It's not too much for him. And so if you haven't already done this as a household, I would encourage you to make a practice of family worship. In other words, pray together, sing together, even if it sounds horrible. Your kids need to hear you singing to Jesus and knowing that he is worth you putting your voice to song, reading the word together. I don't know if that has to be every single day. That's really hard. But trying something to bring worship into your household. If that's part of what 2020 does, is that our need of a particular gathering in particular ways at a church kind of changes a bit to where we're focused even more on what's going on in our household and worshiping Jesus there, I think that's a good thing. I'm okay with that even as a pastor. So I would encourage you, like Jairus, to humble yourself, to implore Jesus. Church, when life gets interrupted, turn to Jesus and implore him. And not only implore him, but also trust him. This is our second application this morning. In verse 43, we read this. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his. So this time the interruption comes from a desperate woman with an incurable disease. Now, her plan was not to interrupt Jesus at all, right? She thought that she could just secretly touch him while everybody else is kind of touching him in the crowd, and then she could slip away unknown. Why would she do that? Well, according to Jewish law, she was ceremonially unclean. Leviticus 15 teaches that not only would she have been, then there was the social stigma. Touching Jesus as an unclean woman would have been considered very inappropriate. What are you doing? You've just made the master unclean. And then Luke also tells us that she was financially destitute, having spent all her medical treatment of any and all kinds in the first century, what all they might have done to her. You're talking about centuries later, they were doing things like bleeding people in order to heal diseases. What would they have done in the first century? She had suffered greatly. And so she had also lost her health, her wealth, and her dignity. Her shame probably had her thinking, who in the world am I to get Jesus' attention? I'm the last one in this crowd that he would give a moment's notice to. Anybody here ever feel that way toward Jesus Christ? I'm the last person that he would be giving attention to because I'm so sinful, because I'm so unclean or broken, unfaithful. Well, this story is for you. Now, her approach may have even been somewhat superstitious. She may have thought, like a prayer cloth, man, if I can just touch something, magic will happen. Lift up your face and look to the God of heaven and earth was the meaning. And so symbolically, the woman was turning from her own effort, her eyes inward at her own effort, and she was putting them on the Lord, seeking, reaching out to touch that which might just be able to heal her. And so regardless of all the motives that may have been mixed, the reality is that Jesus healed her instantly. And Jesus did in a moment what no one else could do for 12 years. Don't miss that Jesus is able to do what no one else can do. And what would have been an interruption to us, considering the circumstances, to Jesus, it was an opportunity. We read in verse 45, and Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" And when all denied it, Peter said, which I'm sure was very helpful, "Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you." Thanks, Peter. But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." Now, what's going on here isn't that Jesus has some sort of strange physical sensation and he's trying to diagnose it. Ooh, I'm itching. What is going on? He knows well what has just happened. And he's using the opportunity to restore not only the woman's body, which he has already done, but also her soul. He draws her out in verse 47. This is beautiful. And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of shoes. Think about the questions that are probably going through her mind, because she doesn't know why Jesus is drawing her out of the crowd. She's thinking, was I wrong in touching Jesus? Have I made him unclean? Will he take my cure away? Because she knows she's already healed. What will all the people think? Are they going to get enraged at me for distracting the master? And yet, she courageously confesses everything, not just between her and Jesus, but in front of everyone. You know what this is? It's first of all, it's what's going to allow her dignity to be restored in the community. If she has this disease that everyone knows makes her unclean, then everybody needs to know that she's no longer diseased. She's now clean. And that's got to be out in the public for her to be restored to normal life. But more than that, this is the confession of a changed life. In Romans chapter 10, verse 9, we hear this. If you confess with your mouth that, what? Jesus is Lord. And you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be what? Saved. Saved from sin, from the worst disease of all that no human can defeat. So the woman had already believed in her heart that Jesus was the solution to her 12-year interruption. She had already done that. Wasn't enough. She had not yet confessed it with her mouth. And so Jesus was graciously giving her that opportunity. It's the same reason, if you remember when we did a baptism recently, that we ask for a sacred confession. We ask for these mighty words to fall from the lips of even the youngest child who's being baptized. Jesus is Lord. He's in charge. I'm not. I submit my life, my ways to him rather than to myself. Jesus, in other words, is my interruption. That's what people are confessing when they say Jesus is Lord. He's my interruption, and I'm okay with it. Jesus' response, verse 48. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." Isn't this what she was truly searching for all those 12 years? Isn't this what her suffering had been preparing her for? That there was meaning to all of that pain?